Welcome to the library you lived in. Oh, I think I'm being in charge today.
You are.
I think I am. So, my name is Anise, and this is my co-host Lisa. And we took this summer to read his Dark Materials trilogy by Philip Pullman, which is The Golden Compass, The Subtle Knife, and The Amber Spyglass. I've read this series several times. I first read it as a teenager when I was probably around 13 or 14. I read the first book, and then since I was just getting it from the library, I think they had the second one, but they didn't have the third one, and so I had to wait until the library got it. So it was a couple of years the first time that I read this series. And I think rereading it this time, the first book stood out to me as being a lot better than the other two. But taken as a whole, I'd still give them 5 stars.
But you're not back.
Well, I have a paperback of the first book, and then I have a Kindle of the entire set. So it's really 5 stars. I do own them. So what, I know you listened to audio. What do you rate these books?
So I was more a fan of the first one than the second and third. So I agree, like the first one was better. And I would maybe put the first one at like a 4, 4.5. And then maybe the second one like a half a step down, and the third one like a half a step down. So I think we're like the 3, 3.5 mark for the last one. I just felt like it lost something as we went on. So
yeah. I noticed that also. I think because it started out like there's a lot of symbolism, but then by the time it gets to the third one, it's like not really symbols anymore. He's just like telling you everything.
Yeah, it's a lot more plot driven by the end.
Yeah. So should we talk about setting first or characters first? I think this all kind of might blend together. It might be hard to discuss just one part of it by itself.
Yeah.
Just because of everything that happens. So I guess we'll start with characters. It starts off telling about the main character is a girl named Lyra, and she's an orphan. She has been raised at this college by all of these scholars who kind of do what they can, but don't really pay too much attention to her. And so she basically does whatever she wants. This is a world like ours, but different, where part of your personality is manifested as an animal that's not a pet. It's just like your conscience or part of your personality that's just separate from you, but it stays with you. And when you are a child, it can take any animal form, but as you grow up, it settles and stays one thing. And so everyone in this world has those. They're called demons. And events start to happen that take Lyra away from the school where she has been raised, and she's in danger. And it turns out there's this whole huge plot that she has to thwart, and there's a prophecy about her, and things get really complicated and intense. And then that brings us into the next book. So we should talk about this a little bit first. So what did you think of Lyra as a character?
I really like her. She's she's well written. Like, she very much is like the carefree, like, I don't know. She's not she's a young child. She's preteen, but she acts like somebody who, I don't know, has street smarts and who's used to kind of doing things for themselves. So she's written really well. She does that all sort of very well, and she has kind of this spunk and stubbornness that comes with that. So I think she's a pretty strong character, and she's really kind of well developed over time. So I quite like her.
I agree. And so in the first book, we come to find out, so she has been sponsored at this school by her uncle, whose name is Lord Asriel, and she ends up meeting a woman named Mrs. Coulter, and she finds out later that these people are her parents, and they're both very powerful in different ways, and both have never been interested in raising her, which is why she never knew that they were her parents, and they have their own things to worry about, and her mother in particular is not a nice person at all, and is actually quite a terrible person, probably one of my least liked book characters ever. And so she's just like this terrifying person, and I think there's probably a lot of symbolism in those relationships that she has with her parents, because they're all the time they're just trying to use her for different things, and it's confusing for her, but they don't really know what's going on fully either. And so it leads her through a lot of different things. And well, I'm not sure if it was part of the prophecy, but the master of the college, when Lyra is leaving, he knows that she's going to have to betray someone. But Lyra doesn't know who it is, or she doesn't know anything about this. But the only way that whatever is going to happen will work is if she unknowingly betrays this person. So were you able to figure that out before it came at the end of the book? Or did you have any ideas about it?
Before it came at the end, yes, but I don't think I put it together in the first book. You know, but before it came around at the end, yeah. I mean, like, I knew it was coming and it was terrible. But yeah, I didn't pick it up this early yet. I think at the beginning I was still just trying to sort out so much of like what was going on, and there's still so much that's sort of hinted at. You know, that you're not quite sure, like the prophecy regarding her, you're like, well, what is it? What, trying to figure out exactly what's going on there.
Right.
And there's so much that you don't find out in this book. So it's definitely a cliffhanger at the end.
Yeah. So this series has been pretty controversial, because in this world, so it's another world, it's not our world, but in this world there is a church that is basically in charge of everything, and they don't always have the greatest intentions. And I know a lot of people, it's critical of the Catholic Church, and that never bothered me, probably because I'm not a Catholic. But it's not real. It's just, it's a fantasy story, but it makes a lot of people upset. And so I know there's been a lot of discussion about like banning these books, and so Mrs. Coulter, who is Lyra's mother, is working for the church, and they have this plan to take all these children up into the far north and basically do experiments on them of cutting their demons away, which are their conscience, their animal conscience, and so I know when we read the How to Read Literature Like a Professor or whatever it's called, that one talked a lot about the symbolism of going south in books. A lot of times that means certain things. But in these books, almost the entire time, it's always north. And it's like the far north, and then even farther, like into other worlds.
Yes.
So do you see any symbolism or get anything out of north being the direction that they were going?
That's interesting that you should bring that up. I think it ties in so much to like the unknown, doesn't it? Because I mean, just sort of the history, like our history and what we have to tie that to would be like the Arctic explorers and how much that we don't know. And especially given sort of the time frame of the book, like you kind of get the feeling it's, I don't know, like 1800s or before then. So you get this idea of like, of sort of those early adventurers and explorers that were trying to find answers for all these scientific things and not quite putting their finger on it, you know? So I feel like that's part of it, you know? There's part of it, I think you've got the Aurora Borealis plays a big piece in there. So I would love to hear your thoughts on that. I think that plays a big part of that as well. And then you have the weather / climate bit of it, you know, like the whole cold, ice, snow bit, I think also is a big part of it, being in the north, you know.
Right. And it's interesting because, especially in the beginning, like the thinking of that is exciting to Lyra. Like she would love nothing more than to go and explore that. And everyone else is going there for different reasons. But I think it is, for all of them, it's a quest. And I agree that it probably has those connotations of being unknowable, of being deadly, otherworldly, dark. But then you have the, like you said, the aurora is coming into that too. So I think you can get a lot of things just out of that. And then when they actually do go north, is where so Lord Asriel, his whole mission is he wants to open up through the aurora. They've seen that there's a city in there, and so he wants to open it up so that they can travel to this other world. And he knows that it's going to take a sacrifice to do that, to generate the power. And so I guess it's mentioned a few times that he's basically the kind of person where if he wants something, he can just make it happen, or just like put things in the works and then wait for whatever it is to come to him, and it always happens. And so Lyra has been out this whole time to rescue her friend, and she rescues her friend, and they end up going to Lord Asriel, and he uses her friend as his sacrifice, and that's what opens up into the other world. And so I think that's the first betrayal that the master at the college was referencing. But then it turns out that there's even more prophecies about Lyra and what she needs to do. So I think in this series, the biggest main themes that I saw were truth, like what is truth, and agency is a super big one. and destiny/prophecy, and how that interacts with truth and agency. So in the second book, we're introduced to Will, who's from our world, and he ends up crossing through a window into the world that Lyra has wandered into. After her friend dies, she goes across the bridge into this other world. And so they meet there, and it's kind of complicated.
It is,
but
there's a lot here.
It becomes clear that Lord Asriel had the reason why he wanted to go into the other world was because they want to stop death, basically. And so in Lyra's world, Mrs. Coulter was working with the church, and they were trying to learn more about dust with a capital D. And so that's some sort of like physical manifestation, like little glittering things that represent human experience. And they think, I thought of it more of like agency, like something like that. It's kind of hard to define, and like nobody in the book really knows what it is either.
No, they talk about it as like proof of consciousness. Really is the only, but you're right, it doesn't come about until after sort of a certain age, which means the innocence of children, it's not around, it's not until you're old enough to make choices.
So anyway, in Lyra's world, the church thinks that everything would be better if that didn't exist, like if people didn't have to worry about it. And Lord Asriel kind of thinks the same thing, that if it didn't exist, everything would be better. And so he's off on his mission to kill the authority and basically finish the war in heaven, because I guess in this story, nobody was happy with the way it ended. So all of these different factions and parties are getting involved and having to pick sides, and Will and Lyra don't really know what to do. And so they make their choices, but all of their choices seem to be leading them to this end. And then they basically come to the battle, and then they escape away from it while it's going on. And it's basically the whole time the witches, I don't think I mentioned the witches, but they come in the first book. These women who live in the north and have magical powers and fly and are really cool. And so they are the ones who the whole time have known the prophecy about Lyra, and that basically it was going to be like an Adam and Eve type situation where she needed to make a choice that was probably wrong, or that everyone would think was wrong, but it would set everything in motion again. And so in the third book, it becomes obvious that there's something wrong with the dust, like it's all flowing off somewhere else instead of congregating around people as much. And it's still, by that point, you're still not exactly sure what it is. But as we learn more and more, it seems that it probably is a good thing. And so they go into the underworld, like into the world of death, because she's just feeling really awful about betraying her friend and that he died, and she wants to apologize to him. And as they go down there, they realize Will has obtained this knife that can cut windows into other worlds, and they realize that if they cut a window down there, all of the spirits of the dead can go back out into the world and they'll dissolve and just kind of merge with everything else. And so they do that. So they basically overcome death so that death isn't scary anymore. And now they can tell people that their spirits won't be trapped there forever. They can go back and be merged with everything. And then at the very end of the book, Will and Lyra have fallen in love with each other, and all of the things that they've gone through, they've grown up enough that their demons settle. And it turns out that they can't, they both have to go back to their own worlds to be able to survive. And it feels like I haven't said anything at all about this story because there's so much other stuff. So I saw, like I said before, I saw a lot of themes in this book, and I felt like they were all basically around those few things I mentioned: truth, agency, destiny, and what do you think?
I think that's a pretty good summary because there's so much to cover. I think in addition to the themes you mentioned, I think power is a big one. I had actually run across something that was talking about, okay, so yes, they've all been considered for banning the books at some point or another. But there was somebody, it was a religious leader that had said he actually promoted the books for reading and discussion because he felt like it wasn't so much like anti-Christian as it was like a discussion on religious dogma and like the way people in authority use religion to kind of control other people. And anyway, so I got to thinking about that. Like in the book, the authority turns over his power at some point. So he kind of chills and he gives it over to a regent, Metatron. And so that regent is a heavenly being, but he's abusing that power. And the angels are all miserable and the earth is out of sorts and all this is going on. And you can see sort of the abuse of power in the church. It has like different groups, and one of them is what did the concept that you could like repent ahead of time? You know, you could self-flagellate whatever ahead of time and save up your penance so that it was okay for whatever sins you committed. So like they're sending out hitmen and like all these different things that like I feel like it's a power struggle, right? And are the people in positions of power using that appropriately?
Right.
Even Lord Asriel said like he gets what he wants, right? He's used to being in charge. He's used to getting his way. And he's very determined. But was he right about what he wanted to do and what he thought? So I think that's another.
Well, I think by the end we realized, especially in the third book, both Lord Asriel and Mrs. Coulter realize that they're going to need to sacrifice themselves for Lyra to be able to complete her mission. And especially with Mrs. Coulter, like in that whole third book, she's struggling because she's feeling these maternal feelings towards Lyra, and Lyra doesn't trust her because of everything that happened before. And we have no idea, and she was so horrible before that you just keep thinking, no, she's lying, like she doesn't mean it, it's not true. But then it turns out that it is true. And I think that probably when they sacrifice themselves at the end, so that she, like, and Lyra never, she doesn't do anything big at the end. Like before that, she had already opened the window from the world of the dead. And so I think that's probably, it seems to me that's like a metaphor for Christ, like overcoming death. That was, I definitely recognize that there. But then after that, all they do is that they decide that they will go back to their own worlds, and they just need to have happy lives and to help people to live meaningful lives, so that at the end of their lives, they'll have a story to tell. And I think that was the main thing that I take away from this series. Isn't that it's bashing religion. It's just saying that these things sometimes happen, that people, like you said, people in authority don't make the best choices or try to control other people. But there was one part I wrote down. Oh, in the third book, there's one point where it says, happiness is the inheritance of humans, and that we must create heaven where we are. And I think that's the main takeaway from this series for me. So I feel like there was a lot of symbolism about the demons. So I think probably one of the reasons why I like the first book so much better than the other two is because I think Pantalaimon, her demon, is a lot more vocal in the first book than he is in either of the others. And so I think even though he is Lyra, he's his own character, and he's like a part of her personality that she can't control. So basically like a conscience. And then in the second book, she is getting closer to this point where she's going to have to make a decision. And when they go into the underworld, she can't bring her demon with her. And so she kind of breaks that bond and leaves it behind and goes through all of this. And when she finds him again, it's not like an immediate like rejoining, like he stays away. And I think that all of that symbolized agency, and how sometimes if you do something that's against your conscience, then it's hard to feel it for a while. And I think after that point is when she and Will were able to feel the specters, who are kind of like these dementor things who come and suck away not your happy memories, but like what makes you a person, like your interest in life and in the world. And as children, they were protected from that, like they weren't vulnerable to it at all. But then after they had done something to leave their consciences behind, then they were subjected to that. And so I think I thought that was a cool symbol.
Definitely. I like put that. I liked watching like all the different demons for all the different characters and seeing like what type of animals and what kind of characteristics do we kind of put with those animals, and what does that kind of tell you about the character? Carlo has that snake demon, and like immediately you can't trust him, right? So just little things like that through the whole of it. And as Lyra like ages, like you said, like Pan changes less, but depending on what he chooses, what form he chooses at different times tells you kind of how she's feeling or how she's reacting to a situation, even though there's no words expressed, just because you can kind of tell. Yeah. But it gives away a lot about the different characters, I think. You know, the way the different characters are. So, and even the way the demons interact with each other when like two characters are talking, but the way their demons are treating each other is different.
That was something that stood out to me more this time reading it. I don't remember the last time I read this series, but I was probably a lot younger. But there was one scene in particular when Carlo and Mrs. Coulter come into that world where they are, and then I was like, I never, anyway.
Realized that she was seducing him.
Yeah, it was much more clear to me this time. And then she kills him because she's a horrible person back then. But what did you think when Will was from our world, he comes into this new world, he meets Lyra, who has a demon. He's freaked out by that. She's freaked out that he doesn't have a demon, because in her world, if you don't have a demon, you're basically a zombie. But she realizes he's a normal person, and so he must have that, whatever a demon is, he must have it inside him. But then it turns out that it does have a physical form, and he meets her. And so did you have any idea like what their demons were going to settle as? Like, did you think that was obvious?
I think by the time I got towards the end, I was just trying to I was just reading too quickly to kind of stop and think about it all. Although Lyra's demon, when she'd been kidnapped by Miss Coulter, every time Miss Coulter drugged her, Pan kept taking the same shape. And so I kept thinking, like, is this the shape he's going to take when he finally settles? Because this is the shape he takes when she's unconscious and has no, like,
right.
I don't know, no emotion or anything.
It totally was.
That's what I kind of expected, that one, but not Will. Like, I didn't think about what Will's demon would be. I don't know. What about you?
I was hoping for that to happen. Like the whole time, like when you find out that Will has a demon, but it's inside him, like the whole time I was like, he has to find it because I want to know what it is. And then he does, and it turns out that she settles as a cat, which is kind of also foreshadowed that he has a pet cat back in the real world, and it does fit with his personality of just kind of doing your own thing, and like you can get around without being noticed. And so I also like being able to see into people's characters through their demons. Like all the witches have bird demons because they fly, and like the sailors have like a seagull or sometimes like a dolphin or something, and then they just have to live at sea forever. So did you think at all, if you had one, what would it be?
No, I didn't think about any of that at all. Which is really funny because you know how people like wander around and say like, oh, my spirit animal is a blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I don't even know what they're talking about. I don't even get it. Like, I don't understand that. So I don't know. What would yours be?
I don't really know either. I mean, I can think, oh, that would be cool, or oh, this one, but I'd probably have to think about it a lot more because it would say something about me.
Right.
Oh no.
It's kind of like the Patronuses and
Oh,
they tell you so much about like who the characters are.
Mm-hmm. It's true.
So it couldn't just be like a cat or a dog, or it would have to be like, we have to really have meaning.
Yeah. Um, so, something I noticed that I don't think I noticed before we read that literature book was like I was looking like at each new scene, I was trying to think like what does this represent or what does this make me think of? And when they came out from the underworld into that world, there was just the plain, like the vast grassy area. And then, like in the far distance, it had the taller trees. Uh, and this is where it basically, the choice is made and like everything starts over. Um, I was kind of torn between two ideas that either it represented like a blank canvas, like starting over, like starting everything over, or maybe it was a reference to, even though I know he's not American, but this is what it made me think of, was westward expansion, like the big grassy plains in America uh, are fairly unique, um, especially like in Europe, they don't have a lot of those. And nowhere near on the same scale. So I wondered, like, I just started thinking about that and like setting off on new journeys, and it's kind of like rebirth.
So when they come out into that plane, isn't it not far from where the Mulefa are? It's like back where the seed pods and everything are.
Yes.
So I was thinking, like, the Mulefa have taken care of the seed pods for like ever and ever and ever since they were created.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of felt like it was like a Garden of Eden moment. Like they're at the edge of the garden because
Mm-hmm.
if the seed pods have been there that long, and then that's the point where they first learn about, hey, you're gonna have to close the windows, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So I felt like that was it. Like it was like this is where you're making your choice. You're gonna either have to this is where you're either getting cast out or choosing to leave and go live your separate lives, or you're choosing to stay here and sacrifice everybody else.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I think I definitely got that also. And I think that's again like well, and he says like especially in the third book, it's really obvious that he's based this series off of Paradise Lost by Milton. Um, and so the whole thing is like winding up towards this idea that sometimes making a choice for the good of everyone else, even though it might seem like the wrong choice or it's a really hard or painful choice, is still the best choice that you can make. And I think just thinking of, I know that Pullman is an atheist, and that's probably another reason why everyone is so defensive about these books. And they're like, oh, he's just bashing the church and he doesn't even believe in God and all this. But I think like a lot of the things he says in this story, in his story, they're like imaginary parts of his world, but I think they're actually true things. And the way he weaves them into his story seems kind of fantastic, and it's obvious that it's not necessarily the way that things always are here. But I think they're true things.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
These things work themselves in sometimes, I think.
Mm-hmm.
For sure. It is interesting, the whole thing. I don't know. What did you think about the three books are named after sort of the three instruments, right? So you have the alethiometer as the compass, and then you have the subtle knife, and then you have the spyglass.
Mm-hmm.
What did you think of those as like parts of the
Well, first off, I think they're really cool. The knife is pretty scary, but still kind of cool. Because basically it has one edge that can cut through anything, like literally anything, and Will loses 2 of his fingers by that knife, and they bleed for like weeks and weeks and weeks afterwards, which is terrible. And then the spyglass is what Mary Malone makes to be able to see dust. And the alethiometer is the compass that Lyra just innately knows how to read, and she can basically get an answer to whatever through dust or dark matter, which is what Mary Malone calls it. She's a nun, a former nun physicist now, who's in from our world, from Will's world. So, I don't know. I always thought the alethiometer was really cool. It's probably my favorite out of all of them, and I kind of wish I had one and that I knew how to read it. But I'm not sure. Like, all of these tools are basically a means to an end, and I think the alethiometer seems benevolent, like it gives information and advice. The knife seems well, and I think when it breaks and Yorick is going to fix it, he says he doesn't want to because he feels like it has like its own intentions, like it when you use it, like there are unintended consequences that may be harmful. And then the spyglass, I think, is different because Mary just created it, and so it's a tool, and being able to see the dust, and when she's up in the trees and it's just like falling down on her and the breeze is blowing and she's like the happiest she's ever been in her life. So I think that probably says something. But I haven't thought about it that much yet.
I felt like, okay, I should think about this more. What does this all mean? And why did why did the author choose those specific instruments like to tell a story? But I haven't thought about it quite as much as I ought to have. I think the compass could very easily be a symbol of the Holy Spirit. It's just telling her what to do, and she's just trusting it. This third party is like, I'm going to do whatever it says. It just tells me, and I just know. And she innately knows how to read it. But at the end of the series, when she's grown up, she can't read it anymore. She has to relearn how to read it. It's not a natural thing anymore. So that kind of is very interesting. How that all works. I don't know. The subtle knife, I thought was tricky, but I'm fascinated with the idea of being able to like just open up into another world and be like, I'm just gonna pop in and out here, or escape off wherever. Although it's really funny, like sometimes he's, he'll be like on a hill and he cuts through and he's like on a high place somewhere, in the next world. But then other times he's like on a hill and he tries to cut through and he's like, oop, I'm going to fall or something. You know what I mean? Like it's not consistent across worlds.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that makes sense, but.
Yeah. Well, and I think it talks about that a little bit because Will is from the Oxford in our world and Lyra is from the Oxford in her world. And when things are working as they should, they are completely on top of one another. And like each place is the same in each one. But I think they were shifted because of the imbalance in everything.
You're right. I forgot about that. Like it talks about everything moving.
Right.
Like the angel at the end explains that, huh?
Mm-hmm.
So not so excited about like, yeah, the other side cuts through anything. So you could kill anybody, you could whatever. But that side's pretty cool, and the idea that you could just and how it kind of describes how he closes the world.
Mm-hmm.
I just picture that, right? You just reach out there and just click. That's kind of cool. What did you think about how the scepters, what do you call them? Specters, yeah. I was like, oh, I can't talk. Like come into the world.
So it was each time he opened a window, right? It created a specter. So that was I think that's what Yorick Bernison was talking about with the knife.
Yeah.
That they didn't know about. And the specters, so in this world that they were in, they were visible. And then Will realizes that there are so many of them that they're probably in all of the worlds and like specifically affecting his mother who is mentally ill and he's been trying to care for her all this time and acting in odd ways. And he realizes that she's being affected by these. So I don't know. I think it's complicated.
It's so sad.
Mm-hmm.
It's complicated, but it's sad. I think the alethiometer is my favorite as well. The spyglass, that was so complicated. Like it just took forever, the making of it and the using of it and the whole bit with the oil, which I was just like, let's just move on. It just felt like it was, I don't know, too scientific for me, I guess. But and then the Malefa. What do you think of that?
I can't really imagine them. Like I kind of have the sort of picture in my mind, but it doesn't really make sense. And so usually I just kind of imagine like their face because I can imagine like a kind of elephant type face, and I just leave it at that.
Yeah, I kind of struggled with that one a little bit, but I don't know. What's the symbolism of the oil in the seed pods, allowing them to see everything?
I'm not sure about that one. But I think it's obviously some sort of a physical representation of a non-physical thing, because I think he does that a lot in these books. Like consciences take the form of animals, and like consciousness or experience takes the form of the dust. And so I'm not sure. I didn't figure that one out.
It bears more thinking on. Mm-hmm. So there are other short stories, and Book of the Dust just came out.
I haven't read it.
No, I haven't either, but it's just come out. So I'm kind of really interested to know what all of these other books bring to light and stories bring to light.
So since I got the Kindle trilogy like all together, and I realized he's added something to each of the books since I guess I had been reading like the old like original editions. But he's added like a little addendum to each book, and he calls it lantern slides. And so in the first book, what starts all of this is that Lyra is spying and sees Lord Asriel show these lantern slides of the north, and this is how he gets funding to start his plan.
Right.
There's this little addendum for each of the books that's called lantern slides, and it just has like these brief little not even really like a snippet. I'll read you a few of them because I think they're super cool. But just kind of like little prompts to imagine the characters at like a certain point of the book, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And so, let's see. Oh, that's not what I wanted. That's not what I wanted either. I don't read a lot of ebooks, so I don't know how to work this. Let's see here. The only bad thing about having this this version is that since it's all 3 books, in the table of contents, it just has the 3 books. Like it doesn't have the chapters listed.
Oh.
Which is annoying for trying to, oh, here we go, contents. That's what I was looking for. Lantern slides. Okay. So in every narrative, there are gaps, places where, although things happened and the characters spoke and acted and lived their lives, the story says nothing about them. It was fun to visit a few of these gaps and speculate a little on what I might see there. So here's one. Okay. Every year, the domestic bursar at Jordan would send for Lyra, or have her tracked down and caught and have a photogram taken. Lyra submitted indifferently and scowled at the camera. It was just one of the things that happened. It didn't occur to her to ask where the pictures went. As a matter of fact, they all went to Lord Asriel, but he would never have let her know.
That's weird.
Yeah, and so it's just like all of them are just like that, like just little tiny little details like that you wouldn't have known. So here's one about Serafina Pekkala, who I love as a character, by the way. She's probably my favorite character from this whole series.
I like her a lot.
So you haven't seen the movie, have you?
I did not watch the movie.
Okay, well, it's compared to the books, it's really awful because they change things and it's so weird. And but the one good call was Eva Green plays Serafina Pekkala, and I think that's the perfect choice. And I always imagine her as Eva Green now. So Serafina Pekkala on her cloud pine would find a still field of air at night and listen to the silence. Like the air itself, which was never quite still, the silence was full of little currents and turbulence, of patches of density and pockets of attenuation, all shot through with darts and drifts of whispering that were made of silence themselves. It was as different from the silence of a closed room as fresh spring water is from stale. Later, Serafina realized that she was listening to dust. So anyway, they're all just like little things like that, just snippets about the characters, about something that happened to them or something they thought or whatever.
Well, that wasn't in the audiobooks.
I know.
That's not okay. That was my version.
So I don't know. I mean, there's a lot more I could talk about, but it's all kind of jumbled. And like I wrote down all of these notes of like stuff that I thought when I was reading it. And I think we've covered the main points.
Yeah.
I think something else that I wanted to point out was I'm not sure how it is in the Catholic Church because I'm not one, but in these books, the church is like obsessed with original sin and that it shouldn't have happened and like it ruined everything, which I think maybe a lot of people do believe that. And that's obviously much different than our beliefs. And so I feel like by the end of this story, I feel like it aligns with, like, in a couple of ways, like, obviously doesn't align with my beliefs, but a lot of the things that he says, I do think are true. And I think maybe the biggest point that he's trying to make is to not follow authority blindly, and that it's important that we're allowed to make our own decisions, even if they have bad consequences. They might have good consequences also. And I think by the end of the book, you realize that that the original sin, like that choice, was necessary, and that it didn't ruin everything. Like it made everything possible.
Agreed. Definitely. And I know a lot of people see original sin much worse than we do in our faith. You know, like we see it sort of as just a necessary, not even an evil, just like a necessary step, you know, like it was to happen, it needed to happen. And we move on. But a lot of people don't say it that way. So I don't know. I think you're right. I think there's some good points and a lot of things that I agree with. It's pretty interesting. Some of the other things are just kind of random, like the fact that the authority, who is God, is like aged and frail, or you know, like these other things that you're kind of like, what?
Well, all of these things, I think people are worried about, like, if a kid reads that, then they'll be like, oh, like this is real, like that's how it is. But to me, like, even as like a 13-year-old reading these books, like it's a story. Like obviously it's a fantasy book. Even though I can recognize some things that are true in this book, I can just as easily recognize that some parts of it are not real. And so I don't know, maybe it's not like that for everyone, but the distinction has always been very clear to me.
It's part of that. It's part of that agency thing, right? So that's when I was reading about sort of the controversy of it all. There was another quote from Philip Pullman that was kind of snippy, cheeky sort of thing, but it was like, I won't quote it right, but it was to the effect of like, oh yes, of course, we can't trust things to readers. How dare we? They might, you know, make sense of something. But I just thought, you know, like there's all these levels that, you know, like everything we've discussed, that's the point of literature. It's to make you think. It's to make you consider all different kind of ideas. It's to make you ask questions and consider things that you never thought of before. And don't know, it doesn't make you some sort of apostate to read and question and have ideas. So I don't think it's a bad thing. I can see where it makes some people uncomfortable, but I don't think it's a bad thing.
Yeah.
So, even though, like by the end, I felt like I wouldn't rate like the last one as high as I would the first. I still found myself completely enthralled with whole passages. Just the writing is beautiful. Just gorgeous and unbelievable. So I'm really looking forward to reading some of his other books.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Sally Lockhart. I also really enjoyed those ones, but they're very different. Those aren't fantasy books. They're more like historical fiction, but like mystery stories. And there's one of them in particular that is terrifying. Which we already know he's good at writing terrifying things because like every time when he's talking about Mrs. Coulter and her golden monkey demon, like I have the shivers like every time when I'm reading it. Very, very creepy. And so it's in this other series, like it's very intense at some parts. But they're great reads, and I know there are TV adaptations of at least a couple of those. I think maybe the first two. That has the girl from Doctor Who in it, the blonde one.
Rose.
Yes, she's in it. And yes, that is who it is. And so she's in that. And I also heard that BBC is doing his Dark Materials.
I heard that as well, as a series, not as a movie.
Yes, so it's probably going to be better.
Yeah, because BBC just does things better like that. I'm really looking forward to that. I want to see that. I think that will be worth it. I almost watched the movie and then I was like, I've heard so many crummy things. I didn't want to watch it before we did our chat. I didn't want to mess with the chat.
It'd probably be okay if you watched it now. I mean, I only watched it one time and I was like I was judging it very harshly because I've read these books a lot of times and I don't know, I never felt like I needed to watch it again.
Isn't Nicole Kidman in it?
Yeah, she plays Mrs. Coulter, and it's Daniel Craig as Lord Asriel.
Daniel Craig.
Yeah, I know. I'm not sure that's a great fit.
I totally picture Nicole Kidman as Mrs. Coulter, though. Totally do. What did I see her in that she kind of had that? It's the Paddington movie.
Oh.
That has that kind of like evil genius thing going on.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And whoever, I don't even know who it is, whoever they had playing Lee Coulter was a great choice. Whoever they picked for that was perfect. I need to find a picture right now because you have to see.
Lee Scoresby?
Oh, that's what I mean, yes. Oh, Lee Coulter. I'm thinking that's When Calls the Heart. Have you watched that?
Not yet. It's in my list, in my queue.
No, it's very cheesy, but the girls watch it with me.
A little cheesy. Okay.
Sam Elliott.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Isn't that exactly what you imagined?
Yes. Speaking of the audio, so I think I said the audio was that I got was the one narrated by Philip Pullman. And he does voices and everything amazing. So the accent for Lee Scoresby is amazing. Well, the accents are just amazing anyway. So he does this great Texan accent for Lee Scoresby, which is just fantastic. And then the one for Yernick Bernison is really great too.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know, maybe next go around you can listen to them.
Yeah. I own the audiobook of the first book with the full cast, which is really amazing too. So I think overall, what I love about these books and why I've read them over and over is because of the characters, because I love the characters. Like Lyra, the character is great, and like seeing how she changes. And Serafina Pekkala and Lee Scoresby and Yorick Bernison, like all of those, you just love them.
For sure. And I didn't at first, I was like, the second book starts out and it's Will. And I was like, whoa, I don't like that. When you get attached to a character that's your narrator and then you change books and it's a different narrator. And I was like, dang it. I don't want to listen to somebody else. But I mean, you don't listen to him the whole time anyway, but he really grew on me. I quite liked Will by the end. So there were a lot of good characters, a lot of good stuff going on. A lot of it. So I agree. I don't know. I wish the whole thing was just a little more tight knit, maybe.
Yeah, I think it kind of, by the end, it becomes obvious that there's still a lot of symbolism, but he's more willing to just like say things straight out, which isn't as enjoyable for me, I guess. Because kind of when there's layers, you can just kind of go with whichever one makes sense to you or whatever. But when they're just laid out like that, sometimes it can feel a little pushy.
Yes. Well, I think like I always tend that way anyway. There are not very many plot-driven books that I'm like, wow, this is the best thing ever. And if I did enjoy it, then it's like once and I'm done. You know? Like I don't ever need to read it again because I already know what happens. But the books that I come back to over and over again, those are the ones that are either character driven or that have like their proper literature. So there's lots of symbolism and meaning. And so when you come back to it at a different point in your life, it like you resonate with something different. You understand a different piece of it, a different aspect of it. So those are the things that I tend to connect more with.
Yeah.
But he definitely is a lovely writer, and I'll read more of his stuff.
I'm good. Thank you for reading these with me. You're my first friend who's ever read them.
Oh, aren't I the first one that also read the other books?
I know, Sabriel.
I know. What is going on? We should have done this ages ago.
I'm glad we're doing it now.
I know. It's all good. All good.
So we're done with our summer break now, so we'll be back to doing monthly picks. So do you want to share what we have on the table for next month?
Yes. So something a little shorter since we've just done like 3 mega books. So we're going to do a Roald Dahl pick and choose. So this month, like this last week, was Roald Dahl's Matilda's 30th anniversary, as well as his birthday. So we're gonna do pick your own Roald Dahl books, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about which ones we read and what we liked and what we think of it all. So I've read a couple, and I think you've read a couple in the past, but that'll give us a chance to kind of get to know them a little bit better. So something fun.
I'm really excited.
Me too. It'll be something good. Yeah, that's what we're doing.
It sounds great. And we will be back next month.
Woohoo! All right. See you then.
Bye.
Bye.